My father and mom were from Missouri. They moved out to Oregon in 1937. My dad entered into a partnership in a small grain elevator in Amity, and I came along in 1939. So I grew up in the small community of Amity. I went to high school there. After high school, I went to Willamette University. The family was, we had our own chickens, we had our own garden, and my mom canned all of the fruit. One of my jobs was clean a chicken house, which was a very good learning experience about how to deal with difficult problems. My dad grew the business there, and in 1971 I bought it from him, so I became the president and CEO at that time. I spent 25 years in that business. It taught me an awful lot about human nature, about relationship with customers, and about agriculture. And I think it did me well through the rest of my life. Well, I really always had an interest in it. I got very involved in student government politics when I was in high school. When I came to Willamette, I got involved in the local politics of student government there as well. And when I graduated as a senior, I was student body president at Willamette. Being so close to the state capitol building and majoring in political science, I got pretty close to it. And part of the reason was that one of my fraternity brothers was Mark Hatfield. He was a state legislator, a governor, and a U.S. senator from Oregon, and of course very influential at Willamette. Some of my supporters said, "It's time for you to do it. It's time for you to run." So in '68 I did. That was my entry into politics. Campaigning was critical to the process of understanding your district and what the people expected, and some of their thoughts about the issues. So I had a lot of coffees, and I'm not sure if that's done today or not, but they are very informative to the candidate. They also let the people know who you are. So in a rural environment, you depend on the downtown Rotary meetings, the Lions Clubs, Chamber of Commerce, that kind of thing for communicating with folks in the city. Couple that with coffees both in the city and in rural areas, you can really get a pulse of what's going on. You know, people talk about term limits a lot, and oh boy, we've got to have term limits to rid the legislative process from long-time representatives and senators. Well, they forget that you have term limits. You're elected for 2 years in the House and 4 years in the Senate. And if you're not doing the people's wishes, they will eventually get rid of you. Now, sometimes it takes time and it takes the right kind of opponent, but the truth is that if you are not representing your district, they're going to find out about it, because there's people out there who will make certain they find out about it. And they'll spend time and effort to teach the people what you're doing wrong in their view. So I've always felt that if you are doing a good job of representing your people and not necessarily your own personal wishes, then the people will continue to have you represent them. There were very few partisan votes in my early years in the legislature. Very, very rare that a party stood together and fought for something or against something. It was more the urban-rural differences and issues. So crossing the aisle was easy from the standpoint of because of the issues you were supporting. If it was an agricultural issue or a forestry issue, then all the rural folks would get together. I always thought myself very lucky to have been the state senator for the area where the wine industry got started and has blossomed. It has literally changed the face of several counties in Oregon, but really Yamhill County. That literally got started in my backyard. back in the early 70s. I was a witness of 4 guys who came to Oregon in the late 60s, early 70s, and started growing Pinot Noir and Pinot Gris wine grapes. If you would have told me that there would be 115 different wineries in Oregon, I'd say, oh, that's not possible. But it sure has happened. It's been a fabulous addition to our economy. If you're a startup winery and all of a sudden you produce X barrels of wine that is immediately taxable, it doesn't give you an opportunity to grow into it. So I sponsored legislation that raised the bar so that the barrel tax on wine, we increased it quite a bit. The legislature thought that was a good move because it gave startup vineyards the opportunity to make wine without having the tax burden. We also created Oregon Grape Growers Commission. As you know, Oregon is made up of a whole bunch of commissions, Oregon government. You've got the Hazelnut Commission, Fescue Commission, there's all these different commissions. Well, the wine industry didn't have one. So we got that bill passed as well, creating the commission for the wine industry, and they instituted some very far-reaching changes that you see today. One feature of the Oregon Constitution that stands out to me is the requirement that all legislators must vote yes or no. You can't say present. You can't duck the vote. So when you're on the floor of the state Senate, the Constitution requires you to vote yes or no. You can be excused and not be there, but there's a way to compel your presence in Oregon. And it happened frequently. When it was going to be a close vote, one of the things that the minority would do frequently is say, I ask for a call of the Senate. And under the rules and the Constitution, the President of the Senate locks the doors to the chamber. The Sergeant of Arms goes out and finds the absent people and brings them back. And then there's a roll call vote and they have to vote. That to me is really vital. You don't want your legislator ducking a vote because he doesn't know what to do or can't decide or something. Some of the other unique features of the Constitution were really brought on by the people, because we were Oregon was the first state to have initiative, petition, and recall, which, as you know, are very vital parts of today's political scenery. There's efforts to try and push that down, and I don't think the people will ever let it happen. Another unique feature in the Oregon Constitution is the requirement that a revenue bill has to first start in the House of Representatives, and secondly, it cannot have an emergency clause put on it. Now, if you think about that a minute, the legislature passes almost all of their bills with an emergency clause, which allows the governor to sign it immediately on passage, and it becomes law. But you can't do that on a tax bill. You cannot put in there that you can have an emergency clause, which means it goes into effect 90 days after passage. That allows time for the citizens who oppose that tax measure to file a petition to refer it to the people. So that little unique feature has led to public votes on almost all major tax initiatives. I think it's a great feature because Oregonians will then decide how much taxes they're going to pay and what kind. Big state treasurer in the state of Oregon is really one of the best kept secrets there is. There's a lot of responsibility, and it's all constitutional in nature. Not a whole lot of pizzazz around it. The treasurer's job is really an executive type job. Yes, it's a constitutional officer, but it's also, you have a very large staff. You have the investment division is handling all the investments for the pension fund, the common school fund, the Oregon State Accident Insurance Fund, a number of funds like that. In addition to that, you have the cash management program. The state of Oregon has a pile of cash because in the spring, when people pay their income taxes, that money's got to last the rest of the year, right? You're managing this cash level so that it ties in with the expenditure level. So if you have a pile of cash, you can make money with that cash. So it was definitely to the advantage of the state to invest that and make more money than the revenue coming in from taxes. So yeah, it's a big responsibility and you have to have good staff. One thing I'm very proud of when I was state treasurer was creating the Oregon Baccalaureate Bond Program. Oregon now has a very viable and successful college savings plan authorized by the federal government so that the contributions made to college savings by citizens is tax deductible both at the state and federal level. When I was treasurer, that didn't exist. And it became very clear to me with the rising cost of tuition, there could be a way for us to help citizens set aside money now for college education later. So I said, well, all we have to do is issue zero coupon bonds. We'll call them baccalaureate savings bonds. Grandparents and parents will buy them. Then the money is available when their grandchild or child goes to college. That thing sold big time on our first issue. So we were able to sell even more. They were sold through local banks and brokerage houses. It was kind of the beginning of college savings in the state of Oregon. And of course now it's a very sophisticated program that's both federal and state. So that was kind of fun to take an existing program and tailor it into a program where college savings could occur. The Oregon State Capital Foundation, to me, is a very important organization. I've often said this is the people's house. And if you're a steward of it, then you have to take care of it. If you come to the Oregon State Capitol on any given day that the legislature in session, I guarantee you, if you sit and listen to the debate on the floor, that there will be something that impacts your life. There will be something that if they change or alter in any way, it will affect you in one way or another. The Oregon Capital Foundation is the way to protect that. It is the people's house. It's where their views get represented, and it needs to be taken care of. If we are going to self-govern, then you need people who are going to take on a responsibility to represent you. Is it important? Absolutely. So people take too much for granted in America. These things don't happen by accident. You don't govern yourself just by saying we're going to do it. You got to get out and work. And I think that there are an obligation of every citizen to understand the government, to participate in it, and yes, even to lay their lives on the line and work for it in some way. So yeah, it's important. I've tried to push that along every chance I get, that people need to invest in their children's future by participating in the government process, whether it's by voting or running for office.